Outburst. So you kind of get to pressure the control decks a little more by demanding more than just one-for-one answers. Luis Alfonso, on the other hand, playing the Jeskai Tempo deck. We have it listed here as Jeskai Alfonso, so he's kind of staking his claim in his own way.
It's like Boss Sly, basically,
yeah, exactly.
right? It's the same idea?
Yeah. So Jeskai Alfonso Tempo. This is a deck that we actually saw on camera, I believe, 2 rounds ago. And it's one that I think is going to have some legs. Basically, Mantis Rider, Goblin Rabble Master. Luis has Ash Cloud Phoenix, where we saw Seeker of the Way as creature 9 through 12 earlier. And Matt's going to kick off with a Despise.
Now, this is a card that, when it got printed initially, I was a big fan of, played 4 copies in the sideboard of my Zombies deck. Didn't really see a lot of standard burn, but I think that this is a card, it's one of those Chandra Phoenix style reprints. First time around, saw a little bit of play.
Sure.
The second time around, I think it's going to be a format staple.
Okay. And looks like it's doing some pretty good work here. Has the choice between Ash Cloud Phoenix and Chandra Pyromaster. And either one of those is going to be a huge impact target. Lightning Strike, Jeskai Charm, and lands the rest of the cards in Luis Alfonso's hand.
Typically, Chandra, at least in my experiences, is really hateful on decks packing a lot of one-toughness creatures, and Matt has that in spades. I mean, outside of the token theme, the other creatures he has in his deck, Bloodsoaked Champion, Brain Maggot, and Goblin Rabble Master, so no surprise to see Matt go ahead and just take the Chandra right now.
Yeah. So he gets rid of the Chandra. Now, you mentioned there are a lot of targets, but of course, they are not the highest impact targets, because they tend to either come in pairs or be recursive in the case of Bloodsoaked Champion.
Right. Matt's deck's a little bit more robust against Chandra than, let's say Mono Black Aggro, for example, that really struggles to beat Chandra if it doesn't have a very developed board, but it's still a problematic card, probably much more so than something like the Phoenix.
Mm-hmm. And Lou's going to drop a Red-White Temple. No play except for Lightning Strike, no good target yet. So just going to take his time, develop his board, keeps the card on top.
And based on, the cards we saw in Luis's hand, now Matt has a good understanding of what's going on with that deck. I think he's probably not thrilled that one of his lands here is Mana Confluence, because his life total is going to be a premium. Even though he may be the aggressor in the matchup, it's still taking these points is not pleasant.
No. He's going to take another one and drop a Bloodsoaked Champion into play, so he's going to get to apply a little pressure. It's convenient for Matt that he actually gets to make the attack when Luis has 3 mana up rather than 2. Gets to kind of play with Luis's curve a little bit, force him to Lightning Strike with 3 mana rather than 2, things of that nature.
Yeah.
But the swing is gonna go through uncontested, and Matt's gonna fire off a Thoughtseize post combat. Looks like we are drawing the Charm in Mana Leak mode. Which is a trade I'm sure Matt's fine with. Oh.
No, I think the Charm is. I think that might be a 4 damage right there.
Okay, all right. Maybe a trade that Matt is less okay with. So. We see the Ash Cloud Phoenix from before, the Lightning Strike before, Stoke the Flames, the new card, and a 4th land to cast it.
And the mana bases in this format, if you're playing the mid-range matchups, you can be pretty liberal with your Thoughtseizes and your Mana Confluences and your Battlefield Forges and so on, but these are the kind of games where it really costs you a ton to have the deck constructed this way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we see a virtual 7 sitting in Luis's hand. Matt's going to chop that down to 3 by sniping the Stoke the Flames, and Ash Cloud Phoenix going to join the party.
Matt also having trouble with his land drops. Has picked up his 3rd land, but not the ideal one.
Oof. Yeah, so Matt now basically has to shock himself to cast any spell. Gonna plunk in there with Bloodsoaked Champion, but he is well behind on the race. And considers his options. Don't know if he has any good ones.
Yeah, using a targeted removal spell on the Phoenix is not ideal. And advancing his board here, he kind of needs to answer the Phoenix, but answering the Phoenix isn't that good.
Right.
It's the squeeze he's in right now.
Yeah, so his options to develop his board look like Mardu Charm or Raise the Alarm, both of which can be done at instant speed, so he is safe to just pass. But as you mentioned, that doesn't actually keep him from taking a very painful 4 damage this turn. Make that 7. Mantis Rider going to join the Air Force here for Luis.
Mantis Rider was a card if I'm being honest, had pretty low expectations coming in of how much it would show up, but this is the second time we've seen it on camera, and you can't argue with the rate. I mean, it's a real good deal.
Sure. I agree with you that I did not expect a ton of it, not necessarily because of its power level. Yeah, it's clearly a very powerful Magic card. It just seemed like the kind of card that needed to find a home, and that home wasn't immediately obvious.
Yeah, you need time usually to figure out how to build these. How do I build my 3-color tempo burn deck?
Right.
Hard to have a good answer to that, 5 days into the set being legal
exactly.
or whatever, but we've seen a lot of it, and it's been good so far.
Yeah, so Luis is going to crack in. He's going to draw Mardu Charm on the Mana Strider, but Ash Cloud Phoenix still gets through. Matt takes 2 more from the double Mana Confluence, down to 5. And again, gonna swing in with that Blood Soaked Champion, but not really what he needs to accomplish to stay in this game.
Yeah.
So again, Matt at 5, at a virtual 3 as soon as he casts a spell. Ash Cloud Phoenix swings in and has a removal spell, but has to take 1 in the process, and Luis shows him 4 damage to finish things off.
So pretty straightforward stuff. These Jeskai tempo decks are going to be really happy to play against Mana Confluence. Not a lot else to be said about it.
Sure. Yeah, and then that's kind of I mentioned there was a lot of red-based aggro, a lot of black-based aggro. There was also a lot of red-black-based aggro.
Yeah.
Some Mardu, some straight red-black. Those Mana Confluences, those are a real cost to actually diversifying your deck the way Matt has.
And Matt's approach is pretty interesting because it feels like he wants to basically generate the same amount of power for mana that the mono red or the mono black decks can. But cards like Raise the Alarm are so good in the mirror match that you might be able to get an edge there if the lands don't punish you that much. But in that game, the lands were a huge hindrance.
Okay. And I'm taking a look at Luis's sideboard right now. He has access to 2 Banishing Light, 4 End Hostilities. That's a big 4 of. 1 Narset Enlightened Master, 1 Karanos, God of the Storm, 4 Disdainful Stroke, and 3 Elspeth Sun's Champion. This is a really cool sideboard, actually.
Yeah, he has the option of just converting into a control deck, essentially, in these kind of matchups. For example, he can bring in his Banishing Light. The Narset maybe even is fine in this matchup. I mean, a 3-power First Striker with Hexproof is going to be able to block and attack pretty effectively. The Karanos, the Elspeths, and just convert into a control deck, like a removal and control deck if he wants to. Curious to see if he wants to take that path. It seems good to me here.
Yeah, it does seem really good. Now, he didn't see much of Matt's deck, to be honest. Based on what you've seen, I don't think you have sniffed out enough to want End Hostilities. Even if you had seen Matt's deck list, I don't think you want End Hostilities. But
I don't know. Once you see Blood Soaked Champion, it's there's an implication there that this guy's packing a lot of creatures of some sort or another. I don't know. I think Luis may make a full swap here. We'll see how he wants the sideboard, but if I were in his spot here, I would want to just play the control game here and not try to race with burn, but just use it as removal spells and get to an end game that Matt's probably not prepared for.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, if you make that swap, do you just cut the 12 creatures? Is that where we're looking?
I think that, I could see cutting the creatures. I mean, maybe you still want the Rider because 3 toughness is good against.
Right.
You can anticipate the 2 and 1 power creatures in Matt's deck, but I think the other creatures you could easily sideboard out.
Okay.
And on Matt's side of the table here, his handwriting is not the best, so bear with me here. A Murderous Cut, 2 Seeker of the Way, an Arc Lightning, 3 Magma Spray, Chandra Pyromaster, 2 copies of Butcher of the Horde, a Hammer Perforos, God of the Forge, Liliana Vess, another Despise, and a card that I cannot identify. Second from the top. Do you have a guess there?
That is... Whoa. Yeah, I have nothing.
All right, well, in any case, of the 14 cards that we're confident about here, I think that, he probably would assume correctly that he's playing against a burn strategy here. So I think that the 2 copies rather of Seeker of the Way, they make a lot of sense here. I think 3 copies of Magma Spray, because you saw Ash Cloud Phoenix, you can assume Goblin Rabble Master. This is the interesting thing about this matchup to me here, is that Luis had what appears to just be a Jeskai burn deck.
Right.
And Matt has a variety of cards in the sideboard that he can bring in to fight that sort of fight, like Magma Spray, for example. If Luis makes a full shift into a blue-white-red control deck, a lot of Matt's sideboard cards here may not be very effective. I think Butcher of the Horde is probably good no matter what happens. If it's a beatdown matchup, that's still fine, and if it's a control matchup, that's still fine. But a lot of these other cards really only work if Luis is doing the one thing, and if he's doing the other, Matt might be lined up with some tools that just don't work.
I think it's really cool that we see Butcher of the Horde in this sideboard. So we actually have 2 different lists that kind of have a post-board juke. You go from having a bunch of small creatures to your post-board plan being playing one enormous flying creature.
Yeah. Interesting to see Butcher of the Horde in the sideboard here. You would imagine that's the payoff here to play this sort of deck, right? A Mardu token aggressive strategy. But Matt only with 2 copies on the board.
Yeah, that is actually kind of an interesting point. I feel like normally you could justify it here in week 1 by saying that, well, it's one of your more expensive cards. You don't want it against aggro, but it actually is a huge card against aggro because it can gain lifelink.
It looks like Matt's deck is trying to be as robust as possible against, Banishing Light, Hero's Downfall.
Okay.
Just 1-for-1 removal spells are pretty poor against him the way the deck is set up. And it's easy to anticipate, something like Obzon midrange being the deck to beat week 1, and then you just want to have as many tokens as possible and fewer just big sticky permanents.
Yeah, the main deck as it's currently configured is very, very good against Hero's Downfall. Although having said that, those 4 Goblin Rabble Masters are a huge lightning rod.
It's okay, but that's a card where the upside's worth the cost there.
Right.
Butcher of the Horde may not be.
Yeah, the difference between 3 and 4 mana, I think, a pretty big deal here.
Yeah.
And it looks like both players taking...
Luis is on 5, and Matt's good to go.
So, interesting to see if Luis's deck can actually fire on all cylinders the way it did in the first game with less material to work with. I feel like that's traditionally the problem of tempo decks, is they're kind of playing 2 games at once.
Yeah, mulligans are also really poor for that sort of deck. But if Luis has converted into, I'm going to kill your stuff and get to Elspeth, maybe that doesn't matter as much.
Mm-hmm. And there is Secret of the Way on turn 2 for Matt, just as you predicted. So if Luis is still trying to get in damage with hasty creatures, Rabble Masters, things of that nature, that card's going to do a lot of work. But if Luis, as we have predicted, is playing basically just removal spells and expensive finishers, then Secret of the Way, not that exciting, although it is going to get in for 2. And Luis with a tri-land and simply passing it right back. Secret of the Way, seeking the way yet again.
This to me feels like the marquee prowess card, at least thus far.
Absolutely. And one that I kind of feel like was flying under the radar.
Yeah. It's definitely not a card that I looked at and thought much of. And we've seen it now a couple times. Not that it's doing a lot of work here, but it seems like a potent tool.
And is going to draw Magma Jet, although Matt is going to replace his clock at the very least with a Raise the Alarm. Yeah, actually, this morning I spoke to Matt Costa. I was making the rounds, asking players what they were playing. When I asked Matt Costa what he was playing, he was very excited. He said, I'm playing this Absent deck. It's basically a Secret of the Way, tempo deck. I had a black-white Secret of the Way deck. I had a Mardu Secret of the Way deck. I decided Absent was the best Secret of the Way deck. He was very, very high on this card. So definitely a card that's going to have a lot of impact. Speaking of having impact, Mantis Rider showing up. Mantis Rider, not a card that I necessarily would want if we're going into this Elspeth and Carano style plan. So
I still think that it's fine just because Matt's bringing so many small creatures to the table.
Okay.
It's likely to cause some sort of headache regardless of what happens. And
as it is, actually, we can see.
Another thing that we've seen, this is the second time we've seen Mantis Rider against a beatdown deck today, is once you untap with mana up, attacking into it is really hard.
Okay, that's fair. So, gonna get another swing with Mantis Rider. Ash Cloud Phoenix joins the party, and Matt's gonna kill it off right quick with a Magma Spray. Magma Spray kind of, let's see, I guess Ash Cloud Phoenix, one of the only, Bloodsoak Champion. So the 2 kind of marquee cards out of Khans of Tarkir that are strongly affected by the exile wording on
For
Magma
sure.
Spray. So
yeah, Bloodsoak Champion's going to be the big one.
Right. Ash Cloud Phoenix, normally a card that has to be dealt with twice. Matt only has to deal with it once, and gets to...
Just really struggling with mana right now.
I started to say gets to crack in, but that Mantis Champion, the Mantis Rider is holding the fort. And yeah, Matt with a full grip, and still just 2 lands. And I'm not actually, is that a...
That's a Murderous Cut.
Murderous Cut? Okay.
And
so clears that 3/3 out of the way, gets to crack in, draws Lightning Strike on the Secret of the Way, but the 2 tokens still continuing to do work.
And if Luis there was willing to use a Lightning Strike on Matt, I think Matt may not be long for this world. If it's not this turn, it's probably next.
Yeah, Matt down to 7. Luis 4 on tap mana. believe I caught a glimpse of a Stoke the Flames. So likely just end step Domu, untap Domu.
Yeah.
Matt's going to poke Luis down to 7. Still no third land, so okay. And there's a Jeskai Charm, so that's 4 to the head. And yeah, I am sensing more burn, but no. All right. So a morph, we know the only morph card in Luis's deck is Ash Cloud Phoenix.
I think Luis has Lightning Strike in hand and just wants Matt to tap out in case he has some sort of life gain or damage prevention effect.
Sure. So, and now Matt is put in this awkward position, like, well, should I tap out and draw it? And there we go.
Yep.
So goes for another removal spell, taps low in the process. Luis shows him Lightning Strike, and 2 games to 0 for Luis Alfonso.
Matt's